You're listening to the CDD-Ghana Democracy Dialogues podcast, a platform for meaningful conversations on governance, democracy, and development. From policy discussions to citizen perspectives, we explore key topics like electoral reforms, economic policies, and human rights. Join the conversation on YouTube, Spotify, and our website. Stay informed, stay inspired.
In this episode, we're looking at corruption. Is Ghana ready to win the fight? That's the big question that we're asking. Obviously, it's a major obstacle to Ghana's democratic progress. And I'm talking about corruption here, often seen as a stable democracy in West Africa. Ghana faces growing pressure from widespread corruption that weakens public trust, strains institutions, and hinders national development. This episode features insightful perspectives from investigative journalists whose work has exposed some scandals and lifted the veil on how corruption operates across different sectors. Emmanuel Dobevi, great to have you. Francis Angel is investigative journalist with Corruption Watch Ghana. Frederick Esiama is a lead investigator. Well, he's investigative journalist with Corruption Watch. Evans is also an investigative journalist. So I welcome you all to this very important conversation.
Corruption seems to have become the easiest way to acquire wealth. People have worked so hard in this country. There are people we know who have consistently, genuinely, honestly earned their keep, but they are unable to save enough money for themselves and for their future and their children, because of the rising cost of the standard of living, again, because of, the chaotic nature of our society. It's not easy to buy land and build a house. It's equally not easy to buy and own a house. Even mortgaging is becoming extremely expensive. So you can't afford all these. And people are thinking about their future. People are thinking about what will happen to their children. So then what do? You are working hard, you are honest. In fact, when you are honest in Ghana, people insult you. They call you names. They are surprised that you are doing the kind of work you do, or you work in an organization like this and you are so poor. I've heard people tell me, how can you be a journalist like this and you're always complaining about money? I own and run a news website, and people ask me, how can you be owning and running a website like this and you don't have money? So people expect that every opportunity you have, use it to make money, whether rightly or wrongly. And so with time, people have just lost their sense of guilt for offending behavior, particularly when it comes to being corrupt. Of course, again, when you look at people who have power and authority, if you take most of the corruption studies done, you find that the police would take bribes at every little opportunity, and now they take it openly. They used to take it and hide, but now they take it in the open. And if you get a case and you go to any police station to report, the attitude of the police you will meet at the counter immediately will tell you that they expect you to pay them money before they do their job. If you've ever been robbed, or if you've ever had thieves break into your house, break into your car, as I suffered that about a year ago, and about 4 months ago, a friend of mine suffered that kind of thing twice. They snatched his phone whilst he was in a vehicle in town, and then he parked his car for just 2-3 minutes, and they broke the car window and took away his bag. He went to the police and came back regretting that he had gone to the police. I felt the same way. They literally communicate to you. Sometimes they don't say it openly, but they expect you to bribe them, to pay them before they do their job. And then, of course, we see them on our roads where they stop cars and say you are arrested. They threaten to take you to the station. And they know people don't have time to go to the station. People are in a hurry to go do their stuff. So people pay them money. But the national, is it NCCE, did a study a few years ago. And what they found was quite shocking, that the organizations that you hardly expect to be taking bribes are taking bribes. At the ministries, government institutions, even people who man our cemeteries So people work to survive, and people are looking for easy ways. So increasingly, people's inhibitions are being lowered. People don't feel shy anymore. People don't feel worried anymore if they are corrupt. And often, our politics has also exacerbated the situation. Corruption is only corruption when you are in government. When the party moves into opposition, they are not corrupt anymore. It is a party in government. And then when government changes, then the ones who now used to criticize government for being corrupt then take over government and also get to be accused of corruption or even actually become corrupt. So increasingly, the barriers for corruption are being lowered, the inhibitions are being dropped, and people don't feel shy anymore. And that is where we are today, and it's, as a matter of fact, put our society in a very, very dangerous position. We are literally at the precipice, and it's not safe at all for us.
So, Frederick, let me come to you.
From Emmanuel, you see that people are now operating more as networks. And this is corruption. They're not talking about other forms of crimes. We are talking about just corruption. It has taken on many faces and many forms.
So, Emmanuel talked about the fact that people are doing it openly. I mean, nobody is afraid of anything any longer. We have a lot of institutions that are supposed to fight corruption. We will come to that in a bit. But I want to talk to Francisca about some of the work that you've done.
Previously, when you do investigation, you find an individual. You realize a lot of the investigation we used to do in the past will be, we mention names of individuals because like an individual's involvement and you establishing the crime the person is committing within an institution. Unfortunately, we are moving away from that and heading deep into institutionalized corruption. And so you are investigating something and you actually think the person at the point of service delivery is the one who is behind the corrupt act. But while doing the investigation, deep into the investigation, you realize that the whole thing is institutionalized. And it becomes difficult to fight corruption when it is institutionalized. When it passes through the channels, when illegal fees, for instance, are being charged, and these illegal fees, they give receipts. Once they give receipts, the corruption has been institutionalized. They are giving receipt, official receipt from institutions for services they are not supposed to charge fees for. That is institutionalized corruption. And so the format is changing. At first, you have an individual who you can hold responsible for the act. Now, you no longer have an individual to hold responsible. It's the whole institution. And it becomes so difficult to find who to hold responsible for these actions. The only institution that I actually saw an actual improvement was STC driving school, because they were involved in this investigation. And 2 of their workers were interdicted and they were subsequently dismissed. 6 months later, after I went to DVLA, I visited STC as well. And the process looked clean. I went through the process and we went there twice, different set of people. I sent different set of people to the place and it was a clean service. As we speak, I cannot tell if they've gone back to the way they used to do things. But then the reviews they promised to do, it was present, it was visible when we visited. And so when we see, because for STC, for instance, even at the interview stage, there Nana Komia, who was at the time the head of the STC, he gave us the assurance right there that this isn't going to be tolerated. These people are going to lose their job. He said it right there, even before the documentary came out. And he kept his word and make sure that people were punished. And I think that would serve as a disincentive for others who work in the same institution. But in other institutions, you expose this thing and they do nothing. These are institutions that state agencies. Now, when it even becomes the bigger scale of corruption, where it becomes it exposes the public officials and things, you realize you do grand stories, you expose grand corruption and all that. At the end of the day, it just becomes famous, but they do nothing to them. And so what do you want to use to tell somebody corruption is not good? When you expose somebody stealing billions of CDs and nothing happens to the person because he's powerful, how do you convince somebody else not to be corrupt? When you've clearly shown that it's a way of making money and you don't get punished.
Evans, let me come to you. Evans says Yamo Mensah is with Code for Africa. Evans, you've done quite a bit of work with Fact Check Ghana, quite a number of institutions that can handle corruption. In fact, in 2018, we also established the Office of the Special Prosecutor, which is a specialized, independent anti-corruption body. So why are we still recording corruption in these numbers? Look at the corruption index. We're declining. Every year we keep going down. So why?
Sometimes I start to think maybe it's also about the commitment to get the work done by some of the institutions themselves. For instance, let me cite this example. When I was doing a story on the free Wi-Fi procurement process, we realized that at the time I had gone in, Yoko had gone to get some preliminary information on the operations of the individual involved, the owner of the company that was executing the contract. And they realized that the contractor was evading taxes. Apart from that, they also knew that the guy's company, for instance, was involved in other fraudulent activities. But they got this report and then they hid it on their shelves and they kept it from the public. And Yoko refused to act on the report. Even when I called the then director of Yoko, Mametua, to complain about this. The only thing she mentioned was that it was still under investigation and that she wouldn't want to speak to the matter. Well, I reported the issue and I had to petition Parliament, the Committee of Education, and even the OSP. And nothing came out of it.
Welcome to the second part of the episode on corruption. This is the CDD-Ghana Democracy Dialogues. Emmanuel, what is wrong with the institutions that we set up?
You look at how many laws Ghana has against corruption. We have so many laws. We have so many institutions that are supposed to be anti-corruption. Denmark only has one law against corruption, which doesn't even mention corruption. It just talks about bribery. There is not a single anti-corruption institution in Denmark, not one. We have Yoko, we have Raj, we have Ghana Anti-Corruption Coalition, we have Ghana Integrity Initiative. How many? We are still creating more anti-corruption organizations. And yet, we are not going far with corruption. It turns out that people who engage in small bits of corruption are the ones that get punished. But those who involve in grand corruption, graft, they walk free. And then you get the impression that the state institutions that are set to actually fight the canker don't seem to be doing much. I don't think they are not doing anything. But are we seeing the effectiveness of their existence? Are we seeing the effectiveness of their work? I don't think we are. When there is no prompt, efficient, timely, effective punishment for crime, people will be emboldened to continue to commit crime. We are not punishing people promptly. We are not punishing people efficiently and effectively. And so people get away with it. If people feel that they can get away with doing wrong, they would definitely be incentivized to do that.
Stay informed, stay inspired.
Welcome to another episode of the CDD-Ghana Democracy Dialogues. My name is Kojo Asante. I am the Director for Policy Engagement and Partnerships here at CDD. At midnight on January 6, 2025, President Akufo-Addo's term ended and President John Mahama's tenure began. Following his victory in the 2024 elections, supporters of the winning party started storming government installations across the country. Their actions, whether to warn occupants to prepare to leave or to seize control, highlighted a recurring issue in Ghana's political turnovers. I have to discuss today's topic with me, a real stellar panel. First, Dr. Esther Ofe-Abuaje is a leading authority on local government and decentralization in Ghana and beyond. We also privileged to have Professor Bochi Kofi Abochi. Professor Abochi is a professor of constitutional and comparative law, currently dean of the law school at the University of Professional Studies in Accra. Last but not the least, my good friend Gifty Intikunedu. Gifty is a governance and intelligence policy professional with expertise in security analysis, public policy, and legal strategy. I mean, what is the one thing that has worried you about the most recent political transition, Dr. Fairwaje?
I think the one thing that worried me about the most recent transition was the deepening political partisan distrust that manifested in the early stages of the transition. I think part of the thinking around the Presidential Transition Act was to bring about some level of smoothness or a framework for smoothness. But that we didn't count on the underbelly, we didn't count on the social, political, and cultural context within which it will be applied. And I think part of the issue has been thinking about political parties as monolithic entities that can be subjected to rational process. And we didn't count on these influences on the environment in which it was going to be implemented.
I'll come back to you on that because there's a way also some sort of a contradiction, because if I recall, the transition teams, smiling before the cameras, reports that, the meetings went well. Later on, there were some disagreements as to some kind of late actions of government, whether incumbent governments had the power or the right to make certain decisions. But as you said, if you juxtapose that against what was going on with marauding groups of supporters, going into installations, either demanding people leave their jobs and all of that, it was interesting that those two scenarios that were happening. Gifty, what's your own sense?
I think that the transition has been largely disruptive rather than administrative. In the context of democratic maturity, one would think that having come this far in over 30 years of what we would call a stable democracy, a change in government should just be a change in leadership with just institutions running their course. But we have this change in government where everything else is disrupted. There's wholesale leadership change. Institutions are having change of leadership. Everything is being disrupted. You really do not know what the focus of key institutions and the governments are.
Because Abuchi, what's your own 2 pence on this one?
For me, what worries me is the fact that we don't seem to learn and we keep repeating the same mistakes, election to election. We all know somehow that there's going to be an outcome from an electoral process. That outcome, whichever way you look at it, will require a transition. So one option is that you have a government in office and that same government wins power. And so there's going to be some symbolic transition. But the other option is where you have a government of the same political party transitioning, and therefore you're going to have another transition intra-party. That is still a major transition and would require appropriate transitioning. The worst case scenario is often when we have one government losing power from a certain political party and having to hand over power to another government of another political party. That is a major transition. Whichever way you look at it, all these 3 scenarios import transitional arrangement that will require that appropriate structures and systems be put in place and will follow a certain trend and template. Even though in 2012 we put in place a certain arrangement, it doesn't seem that we have learned anything. Not to mention the fact that the 2012 arrangement was largely imperfect in many respects. But the most important thing is, for some reason, we seem not to have just learned the basics. And we act as if we don't know that the election will come out with a consequence, for which course we must be ready for the consequence. We seem to always start preparing for transitions after the election has ended. and after a candidate has been declared to have been victorious, that's when we start the transition, which is the wrong timing. We should start the transition as early as we start the electoral process. If it's January of the election year, we should do that. We never seem to do that. And for me, that's what worries me. So the uncertainty of the transition process, which then culminates in all the other outcomes, including disagreements on basic things like figures, disagreements on state assets, disagreements on how to even go about the entire transitioning, not to mention the fact that foot soldiers then, of course, charge into the wild, seizing whatever they could lay hands on.
Wow. The picture that you paint is, really kind of reveal how extensive this, as Gifty say, this disruption is, over everybody's life. And as you said, the actual transition within parties, obviously doesn't tend to have the same impact like a transition between parties. How does the Transition Act address or not address these kinds of issues, which really has to do with the management of the state?
The distinction between the state and the government is critical for the success of every governance. The state is supposed to be a permanent entity around which the government revolves. And so the expectation is that every 4 years we have elections. But the expectation is not that every 4 years the state will change. Unfortunately, we've had a tendency since, sadly, 1992, where after every election, the country goes through something of a transition that involves the state. The state is not supposed to transition. The state is a permanent entity. We inherited this from the British colonial administration, where the public and civil service is supposed to have the element of permanence. And then government revolves around that through elections or whichever format of changes that we adopt. And so that erosion of the distinction between the state and the government is fundamentally the reason why we stand where we stand. And it's directly attributable to how we have handled elections since 1992. The second point being where there's a polarized political space. So our political space is so polarized to a point where there's a perception of ownership of not only the government, but also the state. It is the reason why when elections are over, electoral winners or actors tend not to see themselves as people who are in government per se. And if you look under the Constitution, Article 295, government is defined as the executive government, the executive arm of states. But what we have had is a situation in which electoral winners by parties after every election see themselves as the new inheritors of the reins, not only of government, but of the very reins and remnants of the state itself. That perception has therefore fed into the mindset of ownership, that state assets are there for the taking. And the state assets are supposed to be the booty or the windfall of elections. So the first one being the erosion of the distinction between the states and the government. The second one being the polarized political space. The third point is the conception of transitions. And the point I was making here is our view of transition is that transition represents a windfall out of elections. So we go to elections typically thinking that it's made up of losers and winners across the spectrum and the breadth of society and everything else there is in between. And so for us, once elections are over, whoever won the election must enjoy the windfall and the benefit of elections. And enjoying the benefits of the transitional phase is an important element for that benefit, whatever it is that people gained at the polls. And so the conception of transition is the transition one mediated in favor of people who see power as having a near to the advantage upon elections, and everybody else has lost everything there is. Taking over positions, taking over resources, taking over whatever gains they think government can give. For them, that is an important outcome of elections, and therefore transition becomes a major medium. The last point is the issue of the of transitions and commoditization of power. We have got to a point where we see power as an economic instrument, and therefore our conception of power is that power must invariably almost always yield economic dividends. If you have that conception of power, that conception of a commoditized instrument called power, then invariably power must constantly be used to the benefits of whoever has the power or whoever is benefiting from the power directly or indirectly. In this context, transitions become an important medium for benefiting and articulating that power. So we have commoditized transition. And for many people, the transitional phase represents the phase of asserting that authority, derivable, that economic authority that gives the commodity which they think should come from power, derivable from transitions. So I think unless we change the mindset on transitions from some of the points that I've political space, the erosion of the distinction between the state and government, the conception of transitions, and the final one being the commoditization of transitions. Unless we have complete transformation of mindset and a transformation of ways of doing things, I'm afraid we are going to go in circles, because like I said, this is not a new conversation. It's been around for so long. Somehow we talk about it, but we just never change.
What is clear is that work is cut out for us when it comes to addressing the problem of political transitions. I think the extent of the disruptions that occur during political turnovers is not just around the presidency, which it appears the Presidential Transition Act tries to address, and even that not successfully overall. There is much more in terms of the state, the bureaucracy, local government, even the social setting within which the political transitions take place. And what has emerged is that we need to be much clearer in terms of what we want to separate, in terms of what we think are part of the political transitions and what should not be part of the political transitions, so that we can protect the state and the permanency of the state and the capacity of the state, to endure even as we have changes in government. So thank you again, and see you next time.
Don Buadu of the MPP was mining in Ankwaso. I went there. It was the former driver who was in the helm of affair for him. I did it back then. The former driver brought money, 40,000 cedis, to bribe the task force that we went with.
The more we push, the more our system allows for divergent voices to be present in this discourse.
In the past 5 years, we have lost $11.2 billion to gold that have been smuggled. All of this gold is coming from all of these illegal activities. And so, the nature of the robbery that is being done to our country is not something that we should be toying with. This is organized crime.
Welcome to the CDD-Ghana Democracy Dialogues podcast. My name is Mama Viosu Abuaje, and I'm your moderator for today's episode. We have a compelling engagement ahead as we discuss the topic: assessing Ghana's anti-galamsey fight, progress, setbacks, and systemic challenges. Joining me are insightful and experienced guests who bring diverse perspectives to this critical issue. Let me introduce to you Erastus Asari Donko, who is a celebrated Ghanaian broadcaster and investigative journalist with the Multimedia Group Limited. We also have Josephine Adbeko. She's a feminist leader in climate justice and sustainable business development. She's the founder of Climate Voice Global, which is a climate advocacy entity. Also joining the conversation is engineer Dr. Ken Ashigbe, who is a respected professional whose work spans engineering, media, telecommunications, and advocacy. Dr. Ashigbe currently serves as the Chief Executive Officer of the Ghana Chamber of Mines. So, Erastus, first with you. Will I be right in saying that there's increased crackdown on illegal mining today? What is the current state of the fight against illegal mining?
I wouldn't say increase fight against illegal mining as compared to a previous administration. I'll be very careful in choosing my words in that area. And it's for one reason. The previous administration, the NPP administration, started very well. In 2017, they declared a ban on all forms of small-scale mining, and they went ahead to enforce the laws on mining. And I must say that they set up the Galamstop, the Interministerial Task Force. It looked promising in the initial stage. Then, at a point in time, they had cold feet. Why? Because they started manipulating the very task forces that they set up to fight illegal mining. Many of the appointees in that administration began to feel that they have to use their power, abused it, to go into Galamsey themselves. And so it was like they were sitting in a bucket and trying to lift themselves off the ground. And it was very difficult for them. So at a point they had cold feet, they relapsed, and they lost the fight. This power changed hands from January to now. Immediately, we had party people who felt that this is our time. Let us get onto the field and start doing what the NPP started doing to gain money. And so many NDC talks got into forest reserves like Tamanya, Bointano, Nimri, and they started invading even GSBA, globally biodiversity significant areas, and they started mining forests.
So are you saying, Erastus, that these places that you mentioned were already occupied, being mined illegally by members affiliated to the previous administration, but once there was a change, different people took over who are affiliated to this new administration? Is that it?
You speak my language.
Let me bring in Josephine. Josephine, what Erastus describes is more of a cyclical pattern where we see periods of intense crackdown and then the problem resurfaces. From his description, it's not as if we're even cracking down anything. When you look at the kind of mass protests that we've had in the last few years, residents' protests or citizens' protests or workers' strikes, for instance, all these are already signaling to us that citizens have taken a position, or the public has taken a position against illegal mining, against uncontrolled, unfettered access to protected resources that we have as a country. And it's become really crucial for our government of the day to restore the very much needed trust of our public, of our people, in how it wants to manage or regulate illegal mining in our nation. And secondly, how the government is going to reassert environmental rule of law, and how the government will reaffirm our own commitment to ourselves in terms of environmental status, environmental protection, but also all these commitments that we keep making year after year, period after period internationally, and as signing ourselves up for all these decrees or policies that we ratify in our country. It's really, we've been presented a moment to do that. And I believe this will send a strong message locally and worldwide that yes, Ghana wants to develop, but no, our development will not come at a cost of ecological suicide to our nation. And I think this is a kind of consciousness that we need. There's a kind of consciousness that activists have, policymakers are starting to introduce into our thinking, into our policies. And it's important that we have a government that also already sees illegal mining as ecological suicide.
So, Justin, I just wanted to pick up on this. I mean, how have we allowed them to come back and there are locals in there?
There's an unhealthy level of disingenuity when it comes to the politics we do in our country, and it's important that we recognize it for what it is, in all ways that it presents to us. And we know that actions have consequences, and when we start thinking about how this issue of Galamsey illegal mining has been politically exploited, there are two things that come to mind.
First is the fact that we use Galamsey a lot, or we talk about Galamsey a lot alongside political campaigns year after year, administration after administration. We talk a lot about it. But Mamavi, when the conversations are happening and they're happening alongside campaign or electioneering periods, it's often talked about in terms of job creation. We will create jobs for you. We will help you transition to artisanal small-scale mining, which is more regulated or better regulated. We will help you get better jobs in other places. We will invest in this community and things like that. So communities are promised jobs and other opportunities. But we also want to talk about elite capture of our forest reserves or elite capture of mining, illegal mining, because whether we like it or not, mining is profitable. Unfortunately, it's profitable only for a few people, and the masses are left to suffer the impact of illegal mining. But it is a profitable venture, and it's no surprise at all that it's been captured by elite forces. We've seen.
Dr. Ashube, are you as surprised to find out that people that were driven out of the Subri forest are back?
Mama V, am I surprised? No. The point we're making about the need to ensure that we militarize the forest guards, we give them the firepower that is over and above what these, because in Abraham and all of that, they have people, and most of these are foreign mercenaries that have brought, who provide security in those places. You know, so if you don't give the Forestry Commission people enough firepower to be able to deal with them, and that's why another proposition that we have as the Ghana Coalition is also the fact that we should establish permanent bases for the military. So as you're going about the process of militarizing your forest guards so that they become like the rangers, the forest rangers of the US and all of that, you also want to make sure that you set up permanent posts for your military in these communities so that they don't, you know, this thing where they go and come, it does not work. Once they have a permanent post in there, they are provided with all the necessary accoutrements and armaments to be able to deal with. When you then start seeing Galamsey, that then you start also holding them accountable. And that's why, to answer the question, part of the question that you posed to Erastus about what a state of emergency would do, the state of emergency will give the president special powers, so that the issues around setting up a special court. You take the example of the UK, for example. You remember when those riots occurred, the UK set up special courts. Within 24 hours, you are arrested, you are taken to the court, you are jailed, you are found guilty, you are jailed. We need to get to that particular point. The issues that has been complained about is the fact that all of these arrests are being done, and then we have issues around being able to get these. When they go to court, it's the same normal way. Fortunately, the Ghana Chamber of Mines, working together with JTI, we've done some training for the magistrates and the circuit court judges in the western, north, and central region. Hopefully, we will begin to start seeing some improvement. But you need these special powers. Another thing you want to be able to do, all of these excavators that are being seized, who are the people who are procuring it? You want special powers that would also give the powers to the president to be able to quickly go after all of these people, make sure that we are following the money and all of that. So, you know, we are in, again, you remember the EPA boss had asked for some number of helicopters to be able to do an operation. Those things she will be able to do very effectively when you have a state of emergency. So yes, we are at war. We've had the IGP tell us about the fact that we are at war. We have had the Minister for Lands and Natural Resources tell about the terrorism that is being wreaked on us. So if you are at war, you have terrorists in your midst, you don't then respond to them the way we are responding to them. There are some parts of this country, if you go around Anyafuri area and all of that, in your presence, you know, Erastus had done stories about people who are mining in the towns. And there was a video, one person was captured on video, you know, he said, confessing to that illegality. Who are the people who are behind all of these people? How are we dealing with them? Another challenge that we're beginning to face that all of us need to re-strategize about. A lot of these young people who come into these communities, they are brought in. Some of them are coming from Boku, so that they are crime. Some of them are coming from Boku and brought in to provide security, and they are getting money to be able to buy weapons and send them to, fuel the Boku conflict. The time has come for us to be able to go to those communities and let them know that there's a 15-year jail sentence if you are found guilty of, crimes under the Minerals and Mining Act 995, as amended in 2019. They just don't get it. Again, when Josephine talks about the fact that there are very rich people who are capturing this, there is a situation where currently somewhere in the Hafu area, a mining firm had been prospecting for over 10 years. Now you have a group of illegal people who have been able to invest $5 million in equipment. Would you call that some small-scale miners who are doing it? $5 million in new excavators, new dozers, new 4x4 pickup trucks, and all of that. And they are encroaching and carrying out, this damage on the land. So the things that we're dealing with, it is not just the issue of your artisanal persons who, in the time of Erastus' father and all of that, to take some pickers and go into the forest and go, and if you go back, you not even find out that they've done anything. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about people who have been able to spend $5 million to go and do an illegality. Very recently, there is a Reuters news report that is saying that in the past 5 years, we have lost $11.2 billion to gold that have been smuggled. All of this gold is coming from all of these illegal activities. And so, the nature of the robbery that is being done to our country is not something that we should be toying with. This is organized crime. For a group of people that spend $5 million to be able to go and encroach. They don't want to go and do all the hard jobs that, if you're a large-scale miner, you have to reclaim and do all. They don't want to do that. They want to be able to rip and rape so that they would be able to bypass us and then deny Ghana $11.2 billion. What would $11.2 billion do for us? It would change the face of our country. But UAE and all of that, and we need to start calling out some of these countries who are buying the smuggled gold. They are depriving Ghana of resources that would enable us to be able to actually develop our country. And in the process, they are leaving behind, a generational damage to our forest, to our people. There are cocoa farms that have taken care of people for ages, taking people to school. They build houses out of that. They are now being cut down because somebody is going to get $8,000 per acre, and afterwards, perpetual, poverty is what now they denounce. So we need a bit more agency to be able to deal with this. And I'm hoping that His Excellency would see this $11.2 billion that we have lost in the past 5 years. And he would realize the fact that his presidency is at stake. These people who rose up against Dr. Anabisu, if they are able to do that, with time, they have a community, Abrewan Ninkrai. But the time you see it, they have a lot of money, they buy a lot more weapons and all of that. They have bought a police commander in their pocket. By the time you see, they've taken over a district. And then they'll start franchising the same thing. So the very existence of our democracy and the presidency of His Excellency is under attack. And we urge him that he needs to look at that and support the Minister for Lands and Natural Resources, support the IGP, and this conversation where we hear the Minister of Interior deporting Chinese people, and we need to call the Chinese out. There are some Chinese companies that are doing good work, but majority of them who have come in and are within the small-scale miners are completely dealing us a bad blow, and that has to be dealt with. So we cannot keep on deporting them and letting them come back like the way Ashawan has come back. And so what the Ghana Chamber of Mines is we're going to do, we're planning a second phase of the training. In that training, we've agreed with the Judicial Training Institute. We're going to have the police prosecutors and the police investigators also in that training as well. And it is, you're right, it's not only that. You remember that when Aisha was arrested, the first charge that was brought against her was some administrative immigration act. It had to take Occupy Ghana, a member of the Media Coalition Against Galamsey, to petition the AG for that to change. Do you also remember, not in recent past, where there were some Chinese that were arrested? A prosecutor went to court and then went to tell the judge that those the two Chinese people had died and had been cremated, and he had to take the judge really standing and say, go and bring me the ashes. So one of the weakest links in all of this it starts with the investigators. They don't collect the right evidence that the prosecutors will need to be able to prosecute the case. And then some of the prosecutors would also go to court and go and do a shambolic job that the judge is left with nothing but, those, sentences that are just a slap on the wrist.
It is clear. We know what the issues are. We know the setbacks. We know the systemic challenges. Where do we go from here? And when I ask this question, I also want you to speak to the people. What must we do to bring action?
I always say that the power belongs to the people. And when I say the power belongs to the people, we tell those we elect what we want and they obey. And many of us for a very long time have been sitting on the fence. We see Galamsey as something that is very far away from us. And so when we talk about it like this, somebody is seeing it as, oh, it belongs to the rural areas. We are in Accra, we are not perturbed. But the end product of what we produce in the rural areas end up in Accra and Kumasi. Whatever banchi, cassava, body, or whatever we harvest from the rural areas, we send it to Accra for sale. The lettuce that we get, we push them to Accra. In Accra, we don't grow lettuce much. Just some few, home garden or somewhere where we grow lettuce or carrots for consumption. All the production is done in these Galamsey areas. We will bring them to Accra for you. So, in the language of the ordinary kenke seller, whose words have not been sold for a long time, you say, Esimusi. Whether you eat it or you don't eat it, we rehash it and we bring it back to you. And you are going to enjoy it. You see, until you are sick and you find out that the doctor says, let's go and do toxicology test, and you find out there's heavy metals in my blood, then it starts sinking down to you. Don't sit on the fence.
There are direct and indirect impacts we see, whether it's health, agriculture, water, the security of our nation, as it's clearly becoming a national security threat. We are all impacted one way or the other, and it should continue to feature in our governance discourse, our economic development discourse, because the implications of unregulated mining are much more than we can even fathom.
Thank you, Josephine. Dr. Shige, Erastus took us to a place, and that's where I want to wrap up with you on. In terms of these aggregators that were engaged to buy gold, do we know, is there a policy guideline? Perhaps from where you sit, you would know this. Do we have rules and guidelines as to who they should buy the gold from?
Well, Mamadi, so the gold board, CEO himself confessed that they currently, as we sit, we don't know where we are getting our gold from, though, and so he says up to September, some traceability is going to happen. The interesting thing, again, speaking as an engineer, is that the engineering around traceability for gold is not like that for diamond, where you are able to trace where the blood diamond and is coming from very concisely. You might be able to tell, looking at the ore and what the composition of the gold, where it's coming from. So it's going to be difficult. So we need to have measures that would be able to ensure that every ounce of gold, we are able to trace it back from where it's coming from. Like what the large-scale miners do, you would be able to trace every gold that gets out of this country, where it is coming from. So it is important that the gold board and in a whole thing of trying to ensure that the 11.4 billion loss, that has been occasioned by Ghana, from the export and the import gaps that we have, into places like Dubai and India, we are closing that. We don't now begin to create a market for these illegal miners. So currently there's a complete, we don't have that under control at all. And so with the number of gold that we're talking about buying, a lot of the illegal gold, a lot of the poisoned gold, a lot of the blood gold is getting into the system. So it is important that as a matter of urgency, we quickly get into, we quickly get to the point where we start putting mechanism. It will not be a scientific way like the way the traceability is going to be. It would have to be an administrative system that holds to account everybody who is buying gold and selling it to the gold board, so that they can go back and tell us where it is that they got that gold from, and we should be able to test it, because it is a very critical thing that we need to do if we really are going to win this particular fight. As we deal with the issue of supply, we should also deal with the issues of demand. And so for us, we would work with the gold board and with, so UMAT, for example, to be able to look into that and make sure that there is some governance around the gold that we're buying. In the current situation that we find ourselves in, unfortunately, is not the best. Mamavi, a staggering 11.4 billion is what we have lost. If you look at the gap between how much we said we have exported to places like Dubai and India, and how much they themselves are counting as they have imported from us. 11.4 billion. That, if we had that, Ghana would not have gone through the turmoils that we went through. So it is important that we block that. And the only way by blocking that is ensuring that there's only responsible and legal mining taking place, and we are not mining on our river bodies, we are not mining irresponsibly in our forest reserves, and we are making sure that people who mine reclaim the lands that they are doing, restore the rivers, and then we make sure that Ghana gets the benefit out of the gold, the resources that we are mining out of the land.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kenneth Ashigbe. Well, it's a long-standing battle, and until we win this fight, we'll continue to fight. Thank you, gentlemen and lady.
Thank you for tuning in to CDD Ghana's Democracy Dialogues podcast, where we dive into the issues shaping Ghana's democratic future. To keep these critical conversations going, we need you. Subscribe to CDD Ghana Democracy Dialogues podcast on YouTube and Spotify to stay updated with every episode. Your subscription helps us amplify voices for peace, justice, and inclusive governance. Don't stop there. Share this episode with your friends, family, and community on social media. Tag us at CDD Ghana on our social media platforms to join the movement. Subscribe and share.